It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Tony Kirkham, who is many would regard as having a rather unusual, almost extraordinary and remarkable career. He has spent almost 40 years working with trees, talking about trees, travelling to see trees, and by all accounts, remembering an astonishing amount about them. Tony joined the Royal Botanic Gardens here at Kew in 1979 as a trainee and went on to become head of the Arboretum, the gardens and the horticultural services, with responsibility for one of the most important collections of trees anywhere in the world. That role involved not only caring for historic and rare specimens at Kew itself, but also working internationally on conservation projects, advising botanical gardens, and occasionally finding himself in fairly remote parts of the world in search of trees most of us perhaps would walk past without even noticing. Over the course of his career, he has encountered trees that are remarkable for many reasons, for their age, their size, their rarity, or the history that surrounds them. Some have survived for centuries against the odds, some have travelled halfway around the world before taking root, and some, as we shall hear this evening, seem to have acquired stories every bit as interesting as the people connected with them. Tonight's talk, My Passion for Remarkable Trees, reflects a lifetime spent in the company of these extraordinary living things, and I suspect that after hearing Tony speak, none of us will look at a tree in quite the same way again. This may make future walks in our parks and gardens rather slower, but certainly more interesting. Tony will speak for about 45 minutes. After there will be a chance for questions before the bar reopens. Now, is there a need to do a little bit of technology here?
Good. Well, we're going to go straight in, and I challenge anyone in this audience in autumn to walk through a park or a garden and see that on the ground and not be tempted to bend down, pick one up, and carry it around for in your pocket for as long as you can. And it's like a trophy. And then how disappointed you are when you find it in your pocket a couple of weeks later, and it's dried up and it's gone a matte colour and shriveled up and gone hard. But it's a beautiful tree, and this is a tree that got me started in my career working with trees. I knew at the age of 10 that I wanted to work with trees. I remember my first careers meeting at school with a careers teacher, and he said, Tony, what do you want to do when you leave school? I said, well, I know I want to work with trees. So he had a clipboard, and he went down the clipboard, and he was flicking pages over, and he said, woodwork teacher. Because I was doing woodwork. And I just thought, I think you've got the wrong end of the stick, quite literally. And then I made my own choices, and I left school I left school at 15 in Lancashire, and I came down to the south, and I worked with, I did an apprenticeship in forestry, and that's what really set my career off. And you're going to meet some trees that kindle that relationship as well. But this was I looked forward to autumn every year from about the age of 10 years old, because this was a source of my play. This was my ammunition for that game of conkers that we all played in the playground, now banned in most schools for health and safety reasons. And I've got to say, when I reacted it at Kew one day, we had bruises all over wrists, fingers, and I sympathised with teachers and fully understood why it had been banned. But this is the ammunition. And I remember throwing things up at trees to get those early conkers down, and I soon realised that the best conkers were at the top of the tree. And if you climbed to the top of the tree, you got the big early conkers, and you could cheat. You could, pickle them. You could put them in the oven. And I'm sure many of you have tried that. But that was the game. Since realised that, there are more to the horse chestnut than ours that we see today that's struggling from a pest, a caterpillar. So when you see them all brown in August, all the leaves are brown and shriveled up, it's because of a pest, a tiny caterpillar that mines between the leaves and eats the chlorophyll, so they go brown in August. And that's stressing the population of horse chestnut. So, being at Kew, you then start looking at alternatives. And there are about 20 different species of horse chestnut, or buckeyes as they're known as in the United States, to see what you can grow. And this is the Californian buckeye. It's a beautiful tree. It's more shrubby. It doesn't get big like ours, but it's got a toxin in the leaf that stops that caterpillar eating it. So it's a good one if we've got problem with the caterpillar. The other good thing about this tree is it flowers for a long period. Those flowers last for about 6 weeks through the summer. But the very best, if you're into conkers and you're going to appear in the World Championships, is the conkers themselves. They're about the size of a tennis ball, and you don't get many in a shoebox. And I remember my son being at school, and I wanted to get that game back in the school at Twickenham Academy. And I contacted a friend, a colleague in America. I said, can you send me some Californian conkers? They weren't allowed into the playground for obvious reasons. We couldn't just push a skewer through and a shoelace. We had to drill them and put rope through to hold them. But if only I'd known about these when I was playing conkers at school. And then this tree, this is the Indian horse chestnut. This will be the alternative species for our horse chestnut in the coming years. This is just next to the Nash Conservatory at Kew, near Elizabeth Gate on the green. It makes a big tree, about the size of our horse chestnut. But again, the leaves have a toxin in there that's toxic to caterpillars. So the caterpillars visit it, but within a few days they're dead, and then that's the end of the population. Excuse me, they won't survive. This particular cultivar is called Sydney Pierce, and although it's from India, it's still very hardy and will be the replacement for the horse chestnut. Now, the interesting thing about this tree is the flowers. It's bee-pollinated. So most trees are wind-pollinated. So the hornbeams that are in flower now and the hazels are loving tonight because they're wind-pollinated. They love the winds that we're seeing tonight. But this tree is bee-pollinated. Now imagine if you're a bee and you fly into this tree. Where do you go? All these flowers. You're spoilt for choice. But the two things, the tree and the bee, have worked out a relationship, a symbiotic relationship to help each other. The tree needs the bees need the tree. So the bee flies to the flower, and this is the flower spike, or we call them candles because they stick up on the tree. And each one of these is a flower that contains nectar for the bees. So the tree, when the flowers come out, it produces yellow florets. The bee knows to go to those yellow florets. When the bee visits that flower and pollinates it, the flowers turn pink. And the bee knows not to go to the pink flowers because it's wasting its time and it's not doing what the tree needs to it. And I love these things, these facts that you find out about trees. And my big question is, how did they work that one out? How did that happen over time? Still amazes me today. And many of these we have to hypothesize and sort of guess and work it out how it happened. But this was me at home in Lancashire. I was what we call a ninja planter. So from 12 years old, I used to get trees and I would plant them on the moors around Darwin, in between Blackburn and Bolton, where I grew up. Today, there's a forest there. So these trees are 55 years old, and they're big trees. They're ready for harvesting. They're all Sitka spruce, Norway spruce, and a few broadleaf trees, and people are asking the question, who on earth planted these and why? But this was me. I had a good head of hair then. And then, it was in 1974, as I say, I left Lancashire, moved south to do an apprenticeship in horticulture. I then moved on and did arboriculture. I was, in my apprenticeship, the managing director got me into the office and he said, you need to get out of forestry. And I was thinking, I've just committed 2 years. Why on earth am I going to do that? He said, the next Prime Minister is going to be a lady, and she doesn't like forestry. She didn't like the tax incentives. And of course, the next Prime Minister was Margaret Thatcher. And she didn't like the fact that, A, the government were paying landowners to plant trees, and then B, 25, 30 years later, when those trees were harvested, the profits were tax-free. It's a huge tax incentive that many celebrities took up and rode on the back of. So I left and went into arboriculture. I went to Maris Wood, studied arboriculture. I worked in Germany as a tree surgeon. And while I was in Germany, I was thinking, I've got to broaden my outlook. I've got to look further than trees and see what else there is out there, plant-wise, that I may be interested in. So, like most good horticulturalists, and there's certainly one in the audience tonight, I applied to Kew. I didn't have the right qualifications because I left school without any O-levels or A-levels, but I was given a wild card, and I did the Kew diploma. When you arrive, you're photographed like a criminal. You're given a number, and every manager in the gardens has this for 3 years. So you know exactly who you are. And when you go through the different departments and sections at Kew, you would find this on all the notice boards, so everybody knew who you were. And, you know, there I am, Kirkham A. Anthony is my name. And I was course 16 in 1978. But I loved Kew. It was probably the best. The 3-year diploma is still the best horticultural qualification that you can get today, and it's revered by many. At the end of the course, I was offered a post at Kew. I then realized that trees were what I had a passion for, I loved, and all these herbaceous plants and bulbs and bromeliads and orchids weren't for me, and I wanted to stay with trees. So I was offered a post in the Arboretum at Kew, in the north end of the gardens, which I took up and did for about 14 years. And this is Kew today, or not today, but you know, the last few years. It is an amazing place. We are so lucky where we live in Richmond that we have Kew Gardens, Hampton Court, Bushy Park, Richmond Park, etc. on our doorstep that we can enjoy. But Kew is just over 300 acres. It was formed in 1759 by Princess Augusta, the wife of Prince Frederick. And some of the trees at Kew today are trees that she actually planted. This is one, and we call them the Old Lions. There are only about 5 left, but we have the exact planting years of these trees. We know exactly how old they are. And she had a vision. Her vision and mission was that she would have the best collection of trees than any other garden in Europe. Not Britain, any other garden in Europe. And she worked hard and employed people to collect trees and build that collection up over the years. This is one of the old lions that remains today. It used to be called Sophra japonica. It's a Japanese pagoda tree. But through the DNA work that Kew do now on trees, on the identification of trees, we found that it didn't fit with Sophra. So it's now been given a new name, and God knows how they come up with these names, but Sniphnolobium japonicum is the new name. And this is the first tree of that species that was introduced to Britain back in the 1700s. It's our living library of arboriculture. We've done everything we can to preserve this tree. We're a bit like dentists. So we've done cavity work. It's got bracing. We've done root canal work. and eventually it will die. Luckily, not on my watch. But when it does die, we will plant a new one, a new specimen, to take the lead in the Arboretum. Now, there are other trees throughout the Arboretum that Capability Brown planted, Bridgman planted, and they date back to, some of them date back to the 1600s, including these two sweet chestnuts, Castanea sativa, from Europe. There's an interesting story about this. They're very easy to identify, the sweet chestnuts, because they have this spiraling bark. But one day I had a visit from Pinewood Studios, and they were looking for a tree. They were filming Harry Potter, and they were looking for a tree that would be the Whomping Willow. And they wanted to take a cast off it. So I took them to the willow collection at Kew, like any good dendrologist would do. It's pretty boring. All the trees were small, and there was nothing there that they liked. But on the way back to the yard, we walked past this tree, and they said, we like that one. Can we have it? And I went, no. They said, why not? I said, because it's not a willow. And they went, yeah, but it's a story. Nobody will know. The children won't know. I went, well, my professional status is at risk here. So we had this long discussion, probably lasted about 20 minutes. And then one of them said, if we give you £5,000, can we do it? And I said, yes. So the Whomping Willow in Harry Potter, the next time you're watching it with the children or grandchildren or yourself, that's the Whomping Willow. And the mould for the film was taken from that sweet chestnut. So you can tell the children that it's not really a willow, it's a sweet chestnut. Now, no disrespect to the audience tonight, but I'm sure you'll all remember what you were doing on the 16th of October, 1987. Yeah? This was probably a big turning point in my career, in my life. I was young, I was at Kew, and on that fateful night, we had the hurricane. Michael Fish was made famous overnight, a resident of Twickenham. And even he shops in Waitrose, and every now and again I would bump into him in Waitrose, and he'd say it wasn't a hurricane. Paranoid about it. But actually, the winds that came through with us were about just after 4 a.m. in the morning. The storm lasted about an hour. That's when most of the damage was done. Luckily, the middle of the night or early morning, so no one was actually killed. But it came through and it did untold damage. We lost, it was the biggest storm in over 200 years, 250 years. 15 million trees were lost in that hour across the south of England, from Cornwall up into East Anglia, across that southern stretch. And before that, we've been lamenting Dutch elm disease and how many trees have been lost to Dutch elm disease. About 20 million trees lost to Dutch elm disease, but over a 20-year period. So in that one night, we lost 15 million. We lost 700 in Kew and 700 mature trees. So it was a real wake-up call. Suddenly, overnight, everybody became experts in arboriculture, in dendrology, forestry, tree surgery, etc. But a big clean-up operation that took 3 years to clear Kew without causing further damage, and to save as much timber as we could for artisan carpenters. Now, when I came in, the winds were still blowing, and I went to this tree. Luckily, I took a photograph of this tree probably about 4 weeks before the storm came through. This is the Turner oak. Again, planted around the late 1700s, the 1790s, and it's I'm going to say it's a semi-evergreen oak. So it's a hybrid of our English oak with the evergreen holm oak, and it was created by Mr. Turner in the 1700s. And there was a race on by the nurserymen in the 1700s to hybridize oaks and have them named after you. So there's a Luckham oak by Luckham from Exeter, and this is a Turner oak by Turner from Essex. I came into this tree, and I stood on the root ball, and the reason I went to this tree was because it had been struggling for about 5 years, and it was going into decline, and I thought we were going to lose it. But I went into this tree, I went to this tree, and when I went under the root ball and stood on the root ball, the root plate, and the whole thing was lifting. So the whole of this tree came out of the ground and then sat back down in the ground. And when the winds abated, there it was. Look at the size of it for the 1790s. 30 years later, it's certainly a picture of health, and I estimate that it's put about a third of its growth on since a hurricane back in 1987. So something happened, and it's a picture of health, and as I say, a third of its size bigger. What we did, we pushed it back, we propped it, so you can see some of the props that we put into, and you can see it's got a slight lean on it, and we mulched it, and then we said this will be the last tree that we cut up. We went back 3 years later, the tree's in really good health. We start asking questions, why? And what we realized was that most of the trees at Kew, and not just Kew, but every other garden everywhere, were struggling from compaction. So imagine walking over that root plate. And what we realized from the storm, with all the trees that had blown over, were how shallow the root plates were. So, on the average mature oak that you see in Richmond Park or Bushy or wherever at Kew, the average depth of a root plate is less than 600 millimeters. So, just over half a meter deep. And the way trees stand up, it's about spread. So those roots spreading out evenly around the canopy, and then those roots gripping the soil. And that's how trees stand up. And trees need to sway. So we see trees blowing about tonight in these winds. They need to do that. That's what they're designed to do. And the sooner we can encourage them to do that, then it's what we call training and preparing for the next storm. So we realized that we needed to start decompacting some of our unhealthy trees. Today we do it with a machine called an air spade. And all we're doing is copying nature. So we're mimicking that storm, and we're doing that, lifting that root ball, getting oxygen into those roots in a less aggressive manner than the 1987 storm. We trialed about 3 or 4 different machines until today we use this machine called the air spade. We call it air cultivation. And then we mulch, and what we're doing is mimicking that woodland floor in the garden, getting rid of that turf and mimicking the woodland floor. And this practice now is used all around the world. This is a company called Bartlett's Tree Services and this was a workshop that I gave in Virginia last year, and we're demonstrating airspace technology. And all that came from that one night at Kew Gardens. So all the trees that were suffering from stress from compaction owe the Turner oak. The other thing was we lost 700 trees. We had a lot of gaps in the Arboretum, so we needed to fill those. But we didn't want to fill them like for like. We wanted to go forward. And so what we did, we looked at where our weaknesses were, both geographically and taxonomically, and then work out what we needed to collect and where we needed to collect them. And that launched the start of a plant exploration program to replenish the collections. Luckily, I was wanting to travel. I was wanting to get away to these countries and see these and collect these as seed to bring back to replenish the Arboretum. We started in 1989. You can see we're very patriotic. Wherever we were, the Union flag came out. But we worked very closely with our colleagues, our similar colleagues in all the other countries that we visited. And these are some of the places. You can see that I targeted the Far East. Probably the most difficult expedition was this one in 1994. So that was 6 weeks in the far east of Russia and Sakhalin Island. And Sakhalin is where the gulags are. So, you know, if you like, Kew sent me to the gulags. Pretty harsh conditions. We were told that it was the end of mosquito season, but it wasn't. And we were actually driven off a mountain by the number of mosquitoes. We were given DEET by the Occupational Health Service. And I remember plastering the DEET on that was having no effect on these mosquitoes. And then when I looked down at my camera case, my vinyl camera case, all the plastic, the vinyl had melted, it was just canvas. And then I suddenly wondered what it was doing to my face. And I decided to stop using DEET and just get off the mountain. But we had swollen rivers that we had to cross. This is the home of the Siberian tiger, the last stronghold of the Siberian tiger. I remember doing this talk at Kew, and I forgot that the health and safety officer was in the audience, who didn't really like us going away on these expeditions, because my insurance is pretty high. And he asked me, did you do a risk assessment? And I did, very quick mental one. Got to get across the river back to safety. And then we went up a mountain called Ablashnaya. Our guide here said you're going to need good clothing and good boots. We had all the gear, Berghaus, Gore-Tex, you name it. He turned up in a Burton suit, an Aran sweater and bumper boots, baseball boots. And actually, when we got off the mountain, he was drier than we were, probably in better condition. But I was given a Kalashnikov rifle, and I was a bit dubious about this, wondering what was going on. But it was to keep bears at bay. So every now and again, I had to fire a shot to warn the bears. But we stay in, you know, quite salubrious vacation. So you can see it's pretty salubrious. I remember checking in at this place in China, and I was given 4 bricks. Not a key, 4 bricks. Couldn't work out what the bricks were for until the middle of the night. And all the doors had gaps under the doors, and the bricks were to put along the bottom to stop the rats coming in under the door. But once you start collecting, you have to dry the seed, dry herbarium specimens, clean the seed, and we trashed hotels, block sinks, cleaning seed. And when we had one situation where the maid came in the morning to bring hot water, and she reported that our room had been ransacked and robbed. In actual fact, we hadn't. We just had seed drying. And we're writing journals and field notes, etc. Now, when I was at school, when I was 10, a friend of the family had done a forestry degree at Aberdeen, and he was emigrating to Canada. He couldn't take his books, they were too heavy, so he gave me my first tree book. What did I do? I went straight to the index and looked for the longest name. Didn't know what the names meant, didn't have a clue that it was a binomial naming system devised by Carl Linnaeus, but I came up with this one. I just thought, that's the best of all these. Metsequoia glyptostroboides. It had a ring to it. So all day at school, this was going through my head. Metsequoia glyptostroboides. That night, having dinner, my 2 sisters, mum and dad, and then halfway through dinner, I just shouted out, Metsequoia glyptostroboides. There was silence. And then they carried on eating. No one asked me what it was. And I'm glad, really, because I didn't know. But from that day, I always remembered Metsequoia. What I didn't realize was that in 1996, when I was in China, we'd finished collecting, and our guide said, do you want to go and see a special tree? We either go back to Chengdu, and you've got a week in Chengdu, or we go and see this special tree, and you've only got a day, 2 days in Chengdu. I said, yeah, I'd like to go and see this special tree. What is it? It's a surprise. We drove for 2 days in a Jeep, and we had to get special permission from the mayor to drive into this town called Modao-chi. And as we went into Modao-chi, there it was. This is the original Metsequoia glyptostroboides. The one tree that every tree in cultivation has grown from. It's what we call the living type specimen. It wasn't discovered till 1941, and it wasn't introduced into cultivation until 1948. That's the living specimen. Today, it's the most planted tree across the temperate world. And this is it. This is the original specimen at Kew, near the water lily pond, from 1948. It's deciduous, like a larch, so it drops all its needles, and then it puts them all out again in spring. Beautiful tree, one of my favourite trees, Metsequoia glyptostroboides. And here we are, stood in front of the living type specimen that was discovered in 1941. So going out and seeing trees in the wild is my passion. And I say to students, whatever you do, wherever you go, if you're going to a conference or you're going on holiday, then go and visit some natural woodland and see plants, whether it's a tree or a bulb or a herbaceous plant. Go and see plants growing in the wild, in the natural habitat, and you will learn so much more than buying my books. And one of the rarest trees at Kew is this tree, Cathea argyrophila. And that same year in 1996, I went to see this tree. Here it is at the back. It's not the best looking specimen, but we were the first of 10 Westerners ever to see this tree growing in the wild. The Chinese had stopped or wouldn't allow it to be for it to leave China. It had to stay in China. No one could collect it. Of course, we wouldn't collect it, but it was good to see it and photograph it. And that was in 1996. And then in 1998, a Chinese forester decided, we need to get this plant into cultivation outside of China for conservation reasons. You know, rather than having all your eggs in one basket, let's get it into gardens. And here it is at Kew. It's a very attractive conifer. Cathea is the old name for China. So that's the genus, and argyrophila means silver needles on the underside. And here it is. It's about to cone, and one year when it started to produce cones and seed, they were all stolen. So the second year, we fenced it, and I used to go around and pollinate the cones with a paintbrush. So we fenced it and put cameras up. Here it is, protected. There's the cones, very attractive cones. And then the seed, when it ripened, produced these lovely seedlings. This is a 1-year-old seedling of Cathea. So it's safe now in cultivation. And at Kew, there are several trees planted through the Pine-Eaton and Arboretum, and it's growing in many gardens. It's quite a fussy plant. And trees are like us, like people. They're moody, they're stressy. But when they're happy, they're beautiful. And we have to live with them and work out what they require. Another plant is this, Carrier cathiensis. This is, I would say, the rarest tree at Kew today. And there are probably about 10 or 15 growing in the Arboretum. But I was on Shanghai market coming back from an expedition in China. And I was on the market looking to buy presents to bring home. And while we were walking through the market, there was a Chinese man, doing candied pecans. Now, most of the pecans come from North America, and the true pecan, Carrier illionensis, is from Texas down into New Mexico. And it's long. I'm sure you've all seen the true pecan. Now, the Chinese pecan is very rare. None of us had seen it in cultivation. We didn't know what it looked like. And it certainly wasn't in cultivation in the UK. It was first discovered by Frank Mayer, who worked for the United States Department of Agriculture in 1959. But it wasn't until 2012, when we were in Shanghai, that we came across this Chinese man doing candied pecans. So this has got to be the Chinese pecan. So I said, I'm going to buy a kilo. So I bought a kilo of seeds. He was just about to throw them in the wok with some sugar. And I said, no, I want them raw. And he went, they're very hard. I said, I've got good teeth. Brought them back to Kew, gave them to the nursery, and he propagated them. He germinated them. Very, very difficult to germinate. But he germinated them and then weaned them off. Here, he suspended them above simmering water, so the steam from the water went up through the pot and brought the dormancy down of the seed. And then we had to wean them off and get them out. And this is a stem of one. And these are the buds. These aren't new leaves coming out. These are the buds. Really unusual plant, but pretty. And then it's got these lovely pinnate leaves, very attractive. And there it is, growing in the Arboretum. So from the market in Shanghai to growing in the Arboretum, these are the things that we do to get these into cultivation. And it's one of the best behaved trees I know. Look how straight that tree is. It's had no pruning, no formative pruning, no training, but they all grow straight and even. This is the Labrador of the dog world. I've got Cocker Spaniels, okay, and they need training. This is the Labrador of the tree world. So in 1992, I was in Taiwan, and I came across this tree. This is the Alishan cypress, and it's about 3,000 years old, and 6 million people a year visit this tree to worship it. It's a sacred tree. There are hotels built. There's a railway to get people in. Here it is, growing in 1992 in Taiwan. When you come back to Kew, your journals go into we have something called the map room, the travel room in the herbarium. All our journals go in there, our field notes, maps, photographs, etc. And I was in there one day rummaging through photographs, and I came across this photograph. I thought, that's the same tree. And you can see that this tree is here, this tree is here. All these are planted when the Japanese ruled Taiwan. This is all cryptomeria. But you can see that, this branch is that. And there's the sign at the bottom in 1918, and there's the sign in 1992. So realize that this is definitely the same tree. And that photograph was taken by this man, Ernest Wilson, who was a student at Kew in 1898. And he was sent to China in 1899 to collect seeds for Kew, for the Arboretum, and the gardens. And he's famous for introducing the dove tree, or the handkerchief tree, Davidia involucrata. He was sent out to find a man called Augustine Henry, who'd sent herbarium specimens over to Kew. And Kew wanted this tree, and all the tree nurseries. Veitch's nursery wanted to get this into cultivation, and they sent Wilson to find Augustine Henry and to find out where he collected the specimens of this tree and get them into cultivation. It took him 11 months to get there via North America, and then when he got there, it was a stump. The locals had cut it down and built a house from it, so he was pretty disappointed, as you can imagine. But he stayed on through the winter, and the following spring, the mountains were covered in flowering trees like this. Now, imagine if you'd seen this for the first time. We're spoilt today. We've got the internet. We've got places like Kew and other botanic gardens that these grow, and in May we can go and see this flowering in the Arboretum. And I do think we take these trees for granted. That would have been the first sighting by Wilson, seeing that tree growing. And he sent it back, he collected the seeds, and he sent them back. And these take about 2 or 3 years to germinate. They were put in the nursery, and then Wilson got a letter. He was in China for 10 years. He got a letter saying, your seed's rubbish, go and collect more. And Wilson was quite surprised because he thought it was good seed. And they threw all the seeds out. Something like 5,000 seeds were thrown on the compost heap. And then they all germinated that year on the compost heap. So they needed 2 years. Today we can trick the tree into thinking it's gone through a couple of winters by putting it in the fridge, taking it out, putting it in the fridge. Now, Wilson, in his last few years, when he worked for the Arnold Arboretum in America, in Boston, he took a camera out and he started to photograph the landscape and trees. And he took over 5,000 glass plate images with a Sanderson camera that he bought on Sandicombe Road from a photographer's on Sandicombe Road, and a big tripod. We're very lucky and we have this set at Kew. And I started to go through his photographs to see if there were any other trees that I'd seen, like the one in Taiwan. And I decided that, having been to China probably about 6 or 7 times, to do a project to see if I could find many of his photographs. And I took about 75 copies of photographs like this, the Balanshan Valley, with all the dates and roughly where they were. And over 2 weeks, we were going to do what he did in 10 years. Everyone said, "You're mad. This is just a photograph in China. How are you going to find it?" But we drove along, and it was literally getting out, holding a photograph up and mirroring it. And we did find these valleys. If you look at this is the river, and there's a tree trunk here. If you pick a couple of trees out, and you can see that almost 100 years ago, after 100 years, barring 2 years, the landscape is still the same. In actual fact, what we realized was that it's in better shape now than it was when Wilson was there, which was good news. Now, other trees that we introduced from Taiwan, this is a sapphire dragon tree. So I introduced this to cultivation to the west from Taiwan. When we were there in 1992, there were only 13 of these growing in the wild. Today, there are more in Kew than there are in the wild. They were all felled in Taiwan to plant apple and pear trees. It's a beautiful flower. If you want to see, it's behind the water lily house, and it flowers, every year, but every other year is exceptional, and it's always Chelsea Flower Show week. Now, one of the things that I hope I've left as a legacy is the Extrata Treetop Walkway. I'm sure some of you will have been up this. It's just over 14 meters tall, and it's 200 meters to get round. And I've worked in the canopies of trees, and you get a totally different view, different smells, different temperatures. And I wanted our visitors to be able to witness that, and not just from by climbing a tree, in numbers. I raised the money, just over 2.5 million, and it was built in a year and opened in 2008. It's visited by many people, particularly schools like it. There's a classroom on the top, and it's a way of experiencing trees from the top, like a bird's eye view, if you like. So, what about the big trees? I've got to show you the giants of North America. And if you haven't seen them, then it's well worth trying to visit them. There are two. There's the tallest tree in the world and the biggest tree in the world. And I took my children to see them. This is General Grant. And we got there, and my son got out the car. He'd be about 14. And he said, "Where are we?" I went, "We're in Sequoia National Park, Robert. This is General Grant. This is the 3rd biggest tree in the world." And he went, "Yeah? 3rd? And I went, "Yeah. So you want me to go back to school and tell all my friends that I've seen the 3rd biggest tree in the world? Where's the biggest?" I said, "It's another 25 miles down the road." I said, if I ask Mum, she'll say no. She'll want to get back to good accommodation tonight in Fresno. If you ask her, she'll definitely say yes. So he said, "Can we go and see the biggest tree in the world?" Yes. And here it is, General Sherman. It's about just under 3,000 years old. It's the biggest living organism in the world. It's not the tallest, it's not the biggest girth, but in volume, it's the biggest in the world. And just to give you an idea of how big this tree is, a huge branch fell off the tree a few years ago, and that branch is bigger than any redwood outside of California. And you'll have seen a few redwoods, so that gives you an idea of the size. And there were thousands of people coming to see this, but it was quiet. Everyone was whispering. Everyone was respectful of the forest and the tree. And here we are, family photograph in front of General Sherman. AI has produced this, just to give you an idea of what it looks like above above the canopy. An incredible tree, and well worth visiting. And then the tallest tree in the world is the coarse redwood. So that's a giant redwood. This is the coarse redwood, sequoia. They're still big, but the tallest tree is Hyperion. And I looked it up today, actually, because it used to be 115.7 meters tall. And today it's just over 116 meters. And they reckon that that's not the tallest, that there are probably others that are as tall. This is Laurelian that I went to see. This is the 7th tallest. It was the 5th. It's now been knocked down to the 7th. And to be named and measured, it's got to be measured with a tape measure from the top to the bottom. It can't be done by laser, so someone's got to climb it and drop a tape measure down and measure it accurately. But they are unbelievable trees. So that's 2 trees. And then we go and see the oldest tree in the world, the bristlecone pine. You either go to Death Valley or the White Mountains. And this is, the oldest tree is called Methuselah, but you can't find that. They won't tell you where these old trees are because too many people visit them. But this is the Patriot tree, which is, it's, you know, not as old, but it's 4,800 years plus. So it's still got some age about it. Family photograph in front of it, and they are incredible trees. So another one of my favourite trees is the Douglas fir. And this was discovered by a man called Archibald Menzies in the 1700s. Archibald Menzies was on... he was on the HMS Discovery with Captain George Vancouver, who's buried in Petersham Church in the cemetery there. So I go and see his grave every now and again, just make sure it's all being looked after. But he fell out with George Vancouver, and all his specimens were lost. The only thing he brought back was the monkey puzzle. So years later, David Douglas, who was a head gardener at Scone Palace in Scotland, was sent out to retrace Menzies' footsteps and recollect the plants that Menzies discovered. So the Latin name of this is after Archibald Menzies. The common name is after David Douglas. Here's the original specimen at Scone Palace in the Pine-Eaton. Fantastic tree. Whenever I go to Scotland, certainly up to Perth, I always drop in and say hello to this tree. Most people are frightened of conifers for its, they can't identify. And some people say they all look the same, but they are very different, and they are some of the easiest. When you go and visit these, I wrote about this in the book Remarkable Trees, and I don't like writing about trees that I haven't seen, and one in particular. But when I went to see this tree, I met some local people, native people, and they were telling me the story of this. It's got fire-retardant bark, which is why it's been around for a long time, and it was the tallest tree in the world before they were all felled. But one year there was a massive fire that went through British Columbia, and all the mice and all the animals, the deer, were trying to flee. And the tree said to the mice, "Climb up my trunk, get under the plates of bark, and the fire, my bark will protect you. The fire will go through, you'll all be safe." So all the mice ran up the tree, got under the plates of bark. And to, I suppose, commemorate that, the tree produced these trident bracts. So that's the back leg and the tail of the mice that were sheltering under the plates of bark. So a really easy tree to identify. But in Remarkable Trees, I wrote about a tree called Big Lonely Doug. I wanted to see Big Lonely Doug, and here he is. He's big, he's lonely because he's on his own, and he's a Dougie fir, Douglas fir. And this is in Port Renfrew on Vancouver Island. And in 2011, Dennis Cronin, the forester, was clearing this old growth forest, a 40-hectare block. Here it is, all cleared. But as he was going through, marking the trees up, working out the timber value, etc., and where the roads were going, he came across his tree and just thought, I can't fell that, it's too good. So he put a tape round it saying, "Please leave, do not fell." And the loggers came through, felled everything, and left this tree. Turned out to be the second tallest tree in Canada. The lumber value alone is worth about $75,000, but fortunately he left it, and there it is, doing well. We all thought it would blow down because it didn't have the protection of the other trees, but it's still there and still safe. And then we go across to Australia. Most of you will have heard of the Wollemi pine. This was a tree that was discovered in 1994 by a man called David Noble in the Blue Mountains. He was canyoning, came across this tree, didn't recognize it, so he broke a piece off and brought it out and gave it to the Botanic Garden. They all said, new species, again described from fossil records like meth sequoia. This is the bark, and the taxonomic description of the bark is Cocoa Pops breakfast cereal. And so, taxonomists do have a sense of humour. The first one planted outside of Australia was planted at Kew in 2005. It had a cage on it so no one could steal it. And it was planted by Sir David Attenborough. I gave him a copy of my book called Plants from the Edge of the World. I thought, good photo opportunity here. And I kept saying to him, can you lift the book up for the paparazzi? But he's very professional and didn't. And then one Sunday I get a call. And I worked in Australia on this project, on the Conservation Recovery Project, and met David Noble. And he rang me, he said, I said, where are you? He said, I'm in Kew. I said, what? You should have rung me. So I said, I'll be there in 15 minutes. So I got into Kew, and here he is. And I thought, I've got to get David Noble to plant a Wollemi pine at Kew. Wollemia nobilis, named after him. What have I got? I've only got one. It's in the nursery. And actually, I'm looking after it for Prince Charles. He won't know. So I got David Noble to plant it. Here he is with his two children. And here it is today, the same tree. And in actual fact, this was a couple of years ago. That's that tree. I planted several more around it just to give it company. And I planted monkey puzzle next to it, which is his nearest cousin. But actually, when you're tree planting, we don't have a good reputation in this country for establishing trees. So if you really want to establish a tree, then you bring in the Royals. They always get it right, and all their trees are successful through to establishment. So just to finish off, you don't have to go around the world to look at great trees. We have a lot in this country. This is our native oak. This is a sessile oak in Cowdray Park. Again, probably about just over 1,000 years old. So it's seen some action. It's called the Elizabeth I oak because it's believed that Queen Elizabeth I sheltered in this tree when she was out hunting. And actually, it's because of hunting that we have these trees in the British Isles. We have more ancient oaks in England than the rest of Europe put together because of the hunting laws set by William the Conqueror. And trees like this are well worth going to visit. This is what I do in my spare time. But it's not just oaks. The yews are just as good. And some of the yews are believed to be around 4,000 years old. It's very difficult to age them because most of them are hollow and we can't count the annual rings. But from records, from church records, etc., we do have a good idea of their age. And most people think that the yews were planted by the church to ward off evil spirits because they're poisonous. But actually, the churches were built by the yews. Many of the yews predate the churches. When Pope Gregory sent Augustine to Britain to introduce Christianity, he told him to build the churches next to the yews. The yews were worshipped by the pagans and the druids, and they were dark and cold. And he said, if you build the church next to the yews and make the church warm and bright with singing, then hopefully the pagans will switch religion and become Christians. You'll not get any closer to the church than this one. This is in Stow-on-the-Wold that inspired Tolkien for in Lord of the Rings. And this one's at Crowhurst in Surrey. Again, thought to be about 4,000 years old. I can't finish without mentioning a good friend of mine, Judy Dench, or Dame Judy, Jude, if you know her. And here we are. We did a film called My Passion for Trees, which was a year looking at the trees in Surrey. And I remember when I was asked to do this, they said, you know, we'd like you to present a program with a celebrity. They wouldn't tell me who the celebrity was until they'd signed up. And then after Christmas, I got the call saying, all right, we've got the celebrity signed up. It's Judi Dench. You've got to come to her house on this day. We'll have a bit of a party, get to know her, and then we do the filming. And anyway, I walked into her house, and all the film crew were there. They were all drinking champagne, all half drunk. And Judy came over and said hello. And I said, "Oh, Judy, I'm really sorry, but when they told me I was filming with you, I thought you were dead." And it was quite loud in the party, and it just went stony silence. And I think they all thought, oh, my God, who have we got? But anyway, she said, oh, no, that was Skyfall, darling, Skyfall, James Bond. So she was great. But we had a wrap, so we'd finished filming. But then I got a call from her saying, have you ever been to Borneo? And I said, no, it's not really my area. It's tropical. I'm temperate. She said, would you like to go? I said, I'd love to go. So she said, leave it with me. 20 minutes later, the phone rang. It was the director of Sky Atlantic. Tony, have you ever been to Borneo? No. Would you like to go? I'd love to go. Pencil these dates out. And Judy, they'd asked her to do a film in Borneo. And she said, well, I'll only go if Tony can come with me. So it was like, pack your bags, away we go. When I got there, 2 weeks before, they discovered the tallest tropical tree in the world. They called it Manara, which is Malay for chimney. And here it is. I hiked in to see it, an incredible tree. And the whole forest are made up of these yellow Marantis. Here we are with a film crew. We were told it was a 2-hour hike in there, and 9 hours later, we arrived, all absolutely exhausted, and then realized we had to get back as well. But the next day we were out filming, and I said to Judy, would you like to go up a yellow Maranti? She said, oh, I don't know about that. And I said, well, we could do. She said, what, up there? I said, well, that's where the yellow Marantis are, up there. We're going to take you 30 meters, oh my God, up this yellow Maranti, and I'm going to show you the biodiversity. She was horrified. But I've got to say how brave she was, and up we went, looking at ferns, different insects, birds, etc. It was a fantastic experience, and one that we both enjoyed. But I hope you've enjoyed just looking at a few trees that I've enjoyed looking at. And I think I would say that trees are for all ages, for children. And if we can inspire children to get closer to trees and enjoy them, then hopefully we'll get more people into our industry. And one of my favourite trees in Savinac Forest is this. This is a Seymour oak, where Henry VIII proposed to Jane Seymour. Thank you.
Try this without a mic. Hope you can all hear me. It's a well-deserved drink, I think. Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
And what a tour de force. So you can hear a pin drop throughout the talk. Very conscious. We've all been sat so still for over an hour now. So we'll just take a few questions, and then we'll call it a night. Maybe Tony, I could just start by one thing. One thing perhaps you didn't touch upon, but I know you've got some thoughts around, is climate change.
Yeah.
And how worried should we be about climate change in this country, and what can we do? What changes? Okay,
that's another hour lecture. But climate change is happening. I think we'll all agree with that. In the 50 years that I've been working with trees, I've seen it change. In the last 10 years, last 15 years at Kew, I was planting trees out in the Arboretum that would only grow in the temperate house. because the winters were too cold, etc. You know, the climate has changed so much. The predicted climate for 2050 is that where we are now in summer will be that of Barcelona. So it's going to be hot, and we will need canopy cover. So it is a worry. Those threats are there. But if we start now with our tree selection, then we can and get it right. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of people who know what they're doing in terms of tree selection. Then we can prepare for 2050. But we've got to do it now. We are going to need canopy cover, and it's no good relying on what I call pioneer species. So your birches, your hawthorns, all those scrubby trees, your mallows. We can't rely on those. We're going to need what we call big shade trees, which are your oaks, your elms, your limes, your hornbeams, your ash. But unfortunately, we've got problems with ash. And we've got problems with a lot of our native species. So we can't rely on the 45 native species of trees that we have in the British Isles. We've got to start thinking outside the box, and we've got to start planting more non-native trees with our natives. So I'm not saying we stop planting natives, but our natives are going to need the protection of non-native trees. And, you know, a lot of people are very anti that. But if we don't run with that, then by 2050, we won't have a treescape. And we are all going to suffer. You know, the last few summers, so our summers are going to be hot and dry, and our winters are going to be warm and wet. And I think we're all, you know, you'll agree we've seen that in the last two years, and we've had record temperatures. And where do we all go when it's hot? We go under the canopy of a tree, because a tree will reduce the average air temperature by about 10 degrees. But they've got to be big trees, and so we've got to integrate the two, and we've got to be brave and do that. And luckily, a lot of organisations, local authorities, etc., are starting to do that.
Okay, super. And any questions from the? Yeah.
Do the tall 30-metre high redwoods have a deep root structure?
No.
Or to stabilise them, or is it as shallow as?
They're shallower than normal. You know, you'd think they'd be deeper, but they're shallower than a. You know, I say about 600 millimetres, the average depth of the tree, but the giant redwoods and the coastal redwoods are probably less than that. So a lot more surface rooting, with the odd tap root from the lateral roots, just to secure them. But the conifers will have a shallower root system than a broadleaf tree, but they work very hard to anchor, because they know in winter when it's windy, like tonight, that they're still in leaf and they've got that canopy like a sail, so they've got to anchor.
Okay.
My question is also about tree roots.
Yeah.
You mentioned climate change. We're also in a borough here that we straddle the River Thames, and one of the consequences of climate change and all that water potentially is flood.
Yep.
I understand that microphone's not working. I understand that planting trees can help with flood resilience.
Yep.
Following on from Paul's question about tree roots.
Yep.
Are there any trees that are better than others for promoting flood resilience?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And our tree selection today, a few years ago, we were just thinking drought-tolerant trees. Now we've got to think drought-tolerant, waterlog intolerant, or will sit in water for prolonged periods of time, will tolerate high UV levels, and be wind sturdy as well. So 4 things that we're looking for quality now in trees when we're planting. And all trees are good for. So one of the things you're describing is trees reducing runoff of water. So they'll take that water up and they'll reduce erosion. And all these things are what we call ecosystem services. So lowering the temperature, slowing the wind down, filtering particulates out of the atmosphere, banking carbon. They're all what we call ecosystem services, and all trees are good for that. Some are better than others, and that's why we need to be thinking wider than the 45 that we have to choose from that are native, and start looking outside for those that have those qualities. And the areas that we're looking at are geographic regions that have, similar climates to what we're going to get in 2050. So East Coast of North America, fantastic. The Caucasus, Mediterranean, etc. But great question, and we have to be thinking outside the box more.
Okay, any other further questions? Yes, there we are.
Yes, please. Can a tree recover from being hit by lightning? And second, the Taiwan red cypress looked like it had a disaster on the top, and it had shoots going straight up in your...
Okay, 2 questions there, yeah. So, lightning is a problem, becoming more of a problem as well. In North America, they do a lot of mitigation work, prevention. So a lot of trees in North America where they have huge lightning strikes have lightning conductors in them. There are 3 trees at Kew that have lightning conductors in that I put in because they're old heritage trees, tall and on prominent mounds, etc. So they're targets for lightning. It's very expensive to put lightning. We shouldn't call them lightning conductors, lightning protection in trees. And our soil in this area isn't good for earthing. So you've got to go down about 9 or 10 metres to get a good earth on this Thames gravel. Depending on how bad the strike is, sometimes trees explode, and they just explode and fall apart. They're not savable. Some trees set on fire, and then some, depending on the species, the lightning will earth quickly to the ground and just blow a piece of bark off, a strip, and they will recover. Second question, the tree. I didn't mention it because I was worried about time, but the Alishan cypress was dead, and we were told it was dead, but not to tell anyone, because 6 million people a year come to see that tree, and if they knew it was dead, they wouldn't come, so the tourist industry goes bust. It's since blown down, so I can tell you about the shoots. They hollowed out the crotches, put soil in, and planted two more cypresses. Now, there are 2 species of cypress in Taiwan. They planted the wrong species for a start, but no one noticed that. But that was to keep the tree alive, keep it going, and keep that tourist coming in. It blew over about 10, 15 years ago, so I can tell you.
Okay.
But well spotted.
Okay.
Well spotted.
So maybe is there a final question at all? Yes, there's one at the back, isn't there? Careful.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. My question is, what is it that you're doing at the moment now that you've retired with regards to pollen and the trees with high pollen rate? Yeah, that's it really.
So what am I doing about that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not planting birches for a start, which have a high pollen count. And you're absolutely right. It is a problem today that a lot of trees can cause asthma or aggravate asthma in asthmatic people. And trees get the blame. It's hay fever basically, but from trees. It's never bothered me. I just get sore eyes sometimes, but it's usually grass pollen that gets me. But a lot of tree selection now take that into consideration, especially around playgrounds and school grounds. And they're looking for trees that don't have those high pollen counts. And they're usually the trees that are wind-pollinated. I started and explained that some trees are wind-pollinated, some are insect-pollinated, some are both. But it's usually the wind-pollinated trees that cause those problems. And it's an important part of tree selection to make sure that we get that right. Okay. Another good question.
Yeah, another super questions. I think we're going to have to call it a day. One more. Sorry, the lights have got me. Yeah, okay, one more.
I think he's had it. Yeah, you've concentrated on this side.
Yeah, sorry, it's the lights.
So,
it's the lights,
yeah.
Tony, it's the lights.
On your discussion about the Aesculus ipecacinum, and in this country, and the one in California, the Californian buckeye.
Yes.
Have you not tried experimenting with the toxin that it produces in order to protect the one in this country, or is it?
Yes. We have, and we did a lot of work probably about 20 years ago at Kew, inoculating trees with it's called Aesculin, into our horse chestnut, and it works for about 5 years, and then it's got to be redone. And there were lots of issues and regulations about injecting trees and inoculating trees, because sometimes it can kill them if it goes wrong. So if you've got a big one and you're brave, then that's good. But yeah, we've tried all sorts. Things like garlic has been used on Aesculus to prevent them going into decline and stressing. But we have used the Aesculin from the Indian horse chestnut and the Californian one to good avail. Yeah. Richard.
How do you know? My name is Stephen Dennis.
Sorry?
My name is Stephen Dennis.
Oh, sorry. You look like Richard.
Sorry, my name is Stephen Dennis. I've been doing some research on yew trees for about the last 30 years or so, and I was wondering how you know that the yew at Crowhurst is 4,000 years old.
I didn't quite get that. Did you? Sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't speaking loud. I've been doing some research on churchyard yew trees for about the last 30 years or so, and
yes.
I was wondering how you know that church at Crowhurst is 4,000 years old.
Just from records, church records and things. I mean, there's a lot of discrepancy over ages of yew trees, as you know, because most of them are hollow, so we can't do increment boring and count annual rings. So a lot of them are measured, and they use church records, engravings, paintings, etc., to work out their age. Yeah, and often we over-egg how old they are.
But obviously, church records don't go back 4,000 years.
No,
so
but they can work out the age that yews are growing now,
right,
and then work back to the size of the yew. But there are some ages that vary from between 2,000 to 4,000 years. So, and you just got to go with the one that you think is right. Mm.
So I think Tony, we're there. Forgive me for missing my friends here on the left-hand side. Oh, okay, one last one.
Sorry.
One. Okay, here we go.
Tony, we've got a wonderful range of trees in Richmond, even leaving aside Kew and Richmond Park. How do we compare as an area with other areas in the UK in terms of the range of trees we've got?
Yeah.
How lucky are we?
We're very lucky. And I know the tree officers in Richmond, Craig Ruddick and his team, and I've complimented them recently on their tree selection and tree establishment, because they're very successful establishing trees when they plant them. And I actually commented to someone the other day that driving around Richmond and Twickenham is like driving around an arboretum because of the diversity of trees. And of course, for a resilient landscape, we need diversity. We've got to get away from monoculture. So where we have roads of all the same species, that's not good today for resilience, so we need diversity. And Richmond are certainly doing that in their planting today. They have a dedicated tree planting officer. That's all he does. And the number of trees that Richmond are planting is huge compared to many other boroughs. I mean, they're appearing everywhere. And as I say, that mixture, that diversity in streets and areas, and some unusual trees. And of course, they can only plant what's available in the nurseries, but they're certainly taking advantage of that. And I think we're very lucky. Mm.
Okay, I think we'll call it a day there. So could we just give one final thank you to Tony? Well done. What a... Okay, just a few final words from myself. First is a couple of plugs, actually. If you enjoyed Tony's talks, I'm sure everyone did, don't forget to buy Tony's book. So, absolutely right. And books, exactly right. And also, there's a super book about Richmond trees. I know many of you already got copies. If you haven't got copies, I think there are some copies at the desk there as well. Big thank you to all the organisers. It takes quite a team from the bar, from the lights, from the sound to pull this all together. Thank you for everyone who's dialed in. So I didn't take any questions from you. One last thing. Our next meeting is coinciding with the forthcoming local elections. One of the things that the Society for many years have done really well, I think, is the hustings. I stand corrected, but I think it's on the 16th of April. I think it's Duke Street Church. It commences about from 7 to 7:30. I think it kicks off at 7:30, but the bar will be open at 7. I think it's one of the key matters that society puts on. And goodness, this year is such a key year to get our politics right. So. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. And the bar, I believe, is about to reopen for those who could do with some refreshment. Good evening.